in the central region of the EEG cap, so in the central region, right up here. So once we ran our subjects through this empathy task, we took their data and we epoched them into 500 millisecond segments, basically focusing in on the 5 seconds that stimuli was presenting and ignoring the in-between. And once we had those segments, we were able to average these activations over 20 trials for each block, meaning instead of having 60 trials to compare, we had 3 blocks of average activations for each electrode for each subject. Once we had that using the fast Fourier transform, we were able to compute the power for the 8 to 13 hertz band for the average epochs, meaning we focus in on the 8 to 13 hertz band while ignoring the other frequencies. And lastly, once we had that, we were able to calculate the 8 to 13 hertz band suppression index, which is the ratio of change. So the way we did that is we took the self and the other activations, and we divided them by the activation during the baseline. And what this does is it allows us to control for the individual variances in the EEG. So focus in on the differences in the EEG that is due to going through the empathy task instead of differences that are due to the individual variances for a person's EEG. So once we have the suppression index, we compared it between conditions, between electrodes, and between populations. And what our hypotheses were was that there would be more human mirror neuron system activation during the self and the other tasks as opposed to the baseline block for both populations, and that there would be more HMNS activation during the empathy task in the extreme empathizers as compared to the extreme systemizers. So our results. So we decided to first focus in on the central region, and we found that in this region, in the self condition, there was more 8 to 13 hertz band suppression as we moved towards the back of the head. So as we moved towards the occipital region of the brain, we saw more and more suppression during the self condition, as well as we found a distinct difference in the self condition as opposed to the other condition. We found more suppression in the self condition. And this was also corroborated by what we found in the occipital region, where we found that there was more suppression, significantly more suppression in the self condition in this occipital region. And lastly, we found that in the midline region there's two main effects. First was that overall there was more of this suppression in both conditions in the systemizers as opposed to the empathizers. You can see the systemizers are in the yellow and the green, as opposed to empathizers in the blue and the red. You can see there's significantly more suppression. And secondly, this again was occipitally centered, meaning as we move towards the back of the head, there was more and more suppression for the systemizers. So where does that leave us? That leaves us with 3 generalized results. That the suppression overall was occipitally centered. So as we moved towards the back of the brain, towards the occipital region, we found more and more suppression. Secondly, that there was actually more suppression, particularly in the occipital region, for the systemizers. And lastly, that overall there was more suppression for the self-task as opposed to the other. So explanations and implications of our findings. So we definitely feel that there's a lot more analysis to be done, and that we plan on doing source separation analysis. So when we found this occipitally centered suppression, we know that this is traditionally exhibited because of alpha activity as opposed to the mu activity. So this source separation analysis is going to allow us to basically tease that apart and really see what activation is due to what rhythm. Secondly is we're going to extend our analysis to other frequency ranges. So going beyond that 8 to 13 hertz band and maybe give us a bigger, better picture of what's going on. And lastly, more subjects. So as I said, we only had 10 subjects, 6 empathizers, 4 systemizers, and we know that we feel that getting a lot more subjects would definitely help us have more confidence in our findings. And that's it. So I just wanted to thank Professor Pineda and Mandy Wong, who unfortunately couldn't be here, for all your help, and thank all you guys for listening to me and listening about my study. And I thought, funny. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
Yes.
And I know that you sorted your subjects in terms of 50%, 50% in the scores, but you actually have the values, right? So one thing that you could do would be to correlate the actual the actual value with any of these effects to see if there's actually specific correlation.
Yeah, that would
One
be
is to see whether it's actually reflecting this division, and maybe we get some power by looking at the correlations versus sort of
just
gross mean
yeah.
splits.
Yeah, that's definitely something we can do. I mean, we have the original data for their scores, so I feel maybe isolating just that empathy quotient would be an interesting study to see if maybe it's not the EQ SQ, but just the EQ that sort of mediates the suppression.
Right. The other thing that we don't have the data for, but I think would be interesting in a subsequent study of this sort of thing, would be to see if these two groups, for example, look differentially. So if you were just to watch the eye movements of the subjects, you know, if like an empathetic person and a non-empathetic person might actually look at different locations in the face, or at the words, or you know, the pattern, and that could also, I imagine, correlate. I mean, that in and of itself would be interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
It might also correlate with these sorts of.
That's definitely interesting. I mean, we're planning on extending the study over summer, so something to consider. Thank you. Yes?
Do you think the age of the subjects makes any difference?
In this study, I don't think so. I think that we sort of isolated to just college-age students, so 18 to 22. And I feel like, but in that population, it's pretty static as far as variations in empathic ability.
No, what I meant was that if you studied like older people or younger children, if
I mean, definitely. I mean, development in every aspect of social function and brain function is definitely varying as far as age goes. So maybe looking at older age groups, more experienced, maybe more empathetic, maybe less empathetic, who knows? But definitely, I feel like you find some differences, without a doubt. Yes?
Do you have any ideas as to why you're seeing greater suppression in the...
Yeah, that's, we feel that because of that occipitally centered suppression, that it might not be quite exhibiting the mu as much as the alpha suppression, which would explain a lot why we're seeing sort of not contradictory, but non-expected results. So that's what the source separation analysis is going to help us with, to see if that is actually because of the alpha or the mu, and that'll help us focus in on our analysis.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.